Minnesota Spectator News with David Sandbeck. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune reports, with a lot of money and limited time, state and local governments scramble to capture and spend the emergency federal funds. An unprecedented $2.2 billion in emergency federal aid is flowing to Minnesota, launching a skirmish among local government officials who want to grab these funds to cover their first responder and public health costs soaring from COVID-19. An end-of-the-year deadline set by Congress to spend all of the money and unclear guidance on how to divide it up. It's setting up clashes, not just between parties, among state, county, and city leaders scrambling to meet the ballooning costs of the pandemic at the same time that their tax revenues are plunging. At the state capitol, the federal funding already has set up a confrontation between Governor Tim Walz and his administration with Republican leaders, who are uneasy about his executive orders shutting down much of the state, and they're pushing for the legislature to have a say in how the federal funds are used to respond to the crisis. And while state officials were deciding how to use the federal bounty, leaders in the Hennepin and Ramsey counties were meeting last week to start hashing out how they'll spend their slices of the pie. Local government has been on the front lines responding to COVID-19 pandemic and will be on the front lines of our recovery, said Ramsey County Board Chairwoman Tony Carter. Under the CARES Act, short for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, signed by President Donald Trump in late March, each state and municipalities with populations of over 500,000 receive aid. The state received the bulk of the funding coming to Minnesota, $1.87 billion, with Hennepin County getting $212 million and Ramsey County getting $96 million. But the state's largest cities, including Minneapolis, population 428,000, and St. Paul, population 313,000, didn't receive a direct federal allocation. Their leaders now are making the case for the state to share those emergency funds. Minneapolis City Coordinator Mark Ruff said city officials have inquired about a cut of the CARE Act, this funding that went to the state and Hennepin County. We won't get a firm understanding of how these funds will be distributed until all of the relief stimulus packages are completed, Ruff said, adding that they should know more in June when the city adjusts its budget to reflect the spending on the pandemic. Walz Budget Commissioner Myron Franz said that up to $667 million of the state's share can go to local governments for pandemic-related expenses, but he said they haven't gotten much more guidance than that. That's the $667 million question, he said. Franz said the Walz administration plans to work with the legislature on how and when the money will be distributed, knowing they're on a deadline. Money that isn't used by the end of the year goes back to the federal government. Franz said he's watching how other states handle the funding. Maryland, for example, sent half of its local government funding to cities on a per capita basis. Missouri sent all the money to local governments based on population. What's a fair way to do this, he said. Look at these hot spots we have in Worthington or other places. If you just distribute it on a per capita basis, they're not going to get the money they need in Worthington to really address that issue. The largest portion of the state's relief funding from federal government is roughly $1 billion. It has other strings attached to it. The state allegedly has moved $228 million to the Public Department of Human Services to fund congregate and home-delivered meals, and to the Health Department for emergency inspectors and rural hospital programs. The money also has been used for grants to airports and rural transit. A $226 million grant is going directly to the Metropolitan Council, along with $93 million for the Minnesota State System and $35 million to the University of Minnesota. Grants of $160 million for child nutrition and $140 million for elementary and secondary education are in the hopper. A tall order. St. Paul City leaders, frustrated over being left out by Congress, are hoping to leverage partnerships with the state and Ramsey County to receive some of the federal aid. Deputy Mayor Jamie Jamie Tincher, said, "We've already spent $3 million on such things as overtime and personal protective equipment for first responders. The city has also created a $3.2 million bridge fund that has been tapped for grants to needy families and struggling businesses. The biggest challenge is a lack of federal assistance to cities under 500,000. Tincher said, "Cities under 500,000 have the same responsibility to their communities as cities over 500,000 do." Daniel Lightfoot, a lobbyist for the League of Minnesota Cities, said the pandemic is pressuring cities because of spiking health and public safety costs and because of revenue drops. CARES funding can be used to reimburse COVID-related costs, such as public safety, overtime costs, and computer equipment for employees working at home, but not to plug the budget holes left by lost revenue. Cities are losing taxes as businesses shut down, and they expect more losses from property tax delinquencies and non-payments. Licensing and permit revenue are down, along with user fee payments for shuttered parks, pools, and recreation centers. We fully anticipate the unbudgeted costs related to this pandemic are only going to go up, Lightfoot said, and the loss of revenue is going to be substantial. With all of Minnesota's 853 incorporated cities left out of the CARES funding, Lightfoot said cities are fighting for direct aid in the next package from Congress. Meanwhile, they're working with states to get out some of the current payments. County leaders say that federal aid going to cities should come from the state's much larger share, not theirs. St. Paul is the state's second largest city, with more than half of Ramsey County's population, and should be eligible for direct support from the state's $1.8 billion CARES allocation, Carter, the board chairwoman, said. The unanswered question is how the amount of aid to cities would be determined. Payments could be based on population, Lightfoot said. Expense reimbursements is another possibility. One option the league likes is using the payment money to support workers' compensation funds. There's also time pressure. Cities need cash now. It's a tall order. It's quite a challenge, Lightfoot said. You have the short-term cost, and then you have the what happens over the next 2 months. A short window. The county-level Hennepin staffers estimate that the cost sheltering and feeding of the homeless, including a move from shelters to hotels, could climb as high as $60 million. The county last week allocated $2 million for a package of $7,500 grants to go to 265 small businesses. Now, commissioners are talking about spending millions more to help renters, senior home residents, and workers, and additional small businesses. "I have a lot of citizens who are literally losing their life's dream right now," said Commissioner Jeff Johnson, a frequent opponent of increased county spending. Commissioner Mike Opeth expressed frustration at the number of seniors living in community settings who are now dying of COVID-19. We're 6 weeks in, and there's no appreciable action that I can see to curb the crush of COVID-19 deaths at long-term care facilities, he said. Ramsey County officials are drafting strategies to deploy the aid in three areas: job seekers, individuals, and families, and small businesses. Job seekers, individuals, families, and small businesses. That's 4 areas struggling to survive. The county has already spent or signed contracts for $8.1 million on COVID responses, increasing capacity and shelter options for the homeless, and purchasing personal protective equipment such as masks and gloves for first responders. We ran to get the money out very quickly to the community and to those most in need, said Ramsey County Finance Director Alexandra Cox. But we need to do more from the state and federal government about how to spend those funds. And with a hard deadline of 8 months, it has to happen soon. It's a short window, Coates said. I'm David Sandbeck. This is Minnesota Spectator News. Thank you.